Thank you very much, and good evening, everybody, and good evening to anybody who may be following us on the Council's YouTube channel. I am Councillor Ian Edwards. I am leader of the Council and Chairman of the Cabinet. Can I remind everybody that we should have our mobile phones please turned silent. Crikey, I forget saying those things. It's been such a while since we've met in person. And also, there being no members of the public present, I will dispense with the normal health and safety announcements, and we will go straight into the business. So, Mark, apologies for absence.
Chairman, all Cabinet members are present.
Thank you very much. Item 2, declarations of interest this evening. Councillor Lavery, I believe.
I do have one. I have one in respect of the item on Hermitage School, which is agenda item 8, non-pecuniary interest. As the trust, it may join. I'm a trustee of.
Thank you very much. Noted. Any others? No. Item 3, to approve the minutes of the last Cabinet meeting. Are they agreed? Agreed. Thank you very much. Item 4, and this is to confirm that there are business items in Part 1 and Part 2. For members of the public, this means that we will be breaking the meeting when we enter Part 2, which are discussions on commercial in confidence issues. As I say, the meeting will be drawn, the public part of the meeting will be drawn to a close at that part. So we're now into the public part of the meeting, Part 1. Agenda item 5, the report of the Corporate Services, Commerce and Communities Policy Overview Committee on the voluntary sector response to the COVID-19 pandemic. Councillor Richard Mills, you're most welcome. Thank you.
Thank you, Leader. On behalf of the previous Corporate Services, Commerce and Communities Policy Overview Committee, I'm delighted to present the outputs and recommendations from this review, which have sought to examine the voluntary sector's response to the COVID-19 pandemic. The review aimed to consider the ways in which the Council and the voluntary sector had collaborated effectively to meet the needs of local communities, residents, and to explore possible areas for improvement as well as future learnings. Throughout our review, members of the committee made use of the variety of investigative techniques and ever-changing backdrop of the COVID-19 pandemic. We embraced new and adaptive methods and means of scrutiny virtually. The committee heard from a wide range of external stakeholders, including representatives of the Hillingdon and UB7 food banks, Hillingdon Mind, Age UK Hillingdon, Harrow and Brent, and the Hillingdon Carers Trust. Now, members were impressed by the candour of the officer team and the evident commitment to build on and apply existing good practices consistently across the range of relevant services in extremely challenging circumstances. What did become apparent was that in response to the pandemic, the Council and voluntary sector partners had worked tirelessly and flexibly to ensure the needs of local residents were met as speedily and efficiently as possible. On completing the review, the committee prepared a number of recommendations. These related to providing voluntary sector grants to enable partners to continue to deliver services to our Hillingdon residents, as well as providing practical, operational and logistical support and guidance to enable partners to increase resilience going forward, better planning and deliver outbound communications to provide our residents with valuable information regarding key voluntary sector services. It is anticipated that the implementation of these recommendations will assist across the borough, increasing the resilience of the voluntary and community sector, as well as enhancing its ability to respond to any future lockdowns or restrictions that hopefully do not come, but may well do so. I'd like to take this opportunity to thank all of the witnesses and officers who gave up their time to assist our committee throughout this review, and commend them for their continued hard work in striving to ensure the provision of high quality services to support our residents across the borough during these challenging and unprecedented times. I'm pleased to present the recommendations to Cabinet as per the paper.
Thank you very much. Councillor Mills. Councillor Dean.
Thank you, Leader. Can I, on behalf of the Cabinet and indeed the Council, endorse the thanks to the many members of our community who have supported the various voluntary sector organisations during this very difficult, challenging time that we've all had. And I think it has been a credit to both them and to the borough that we have managed to deliver so much in support via the voluntary sector. I think in moving the recommendations, which start at the bottom of page 9 and 3 more on page 10 of the report, which we're very pleased to do so, we also need to give, I think, consideration to 3 further questions which we can take away and give some thought to. One is in terms of how do we really make sure that best practice is kept and shared equally across the borough when there is clearly a large number of good examples of organisations that have been able to adapt and been able to develop their processes which are indeed such best practice. How we make sure that other organisations get hold of that information and are able to use it for themselves. The second one, I think, is that whilst voluntary grants and we as a borough have always prided ourselves, quite rightly, that we have continued to give more voluntary grants to organisations than many London boroughs, I think there is a question in terms of whether some of these groups would actually find it now even more beneficial to themselves and therefore to the people to which they serve if we can give consideration to moving away from direct grant to a more commissioned service which is very clearly specified and defined as to what is expected and how to be delivered. And I think that's an area that, not for all voluntary groups, but for some of the groups would benefit from that kind of consideration. And my final point, which I think we need to give a lot of thought to, is the ability of these organisations to be able to renew themselves. And I think with the Hillingdon People magazine that we proudly still utilise and share throughout all the various households in this borough, we should maybe take the opportunity, Leader, of utilising that to demonstrate the wide range of voluntary groups that we have up and down the borough that are working, and to encourage people who may be a bit hesitant and maybe not quite knowing what to expect or whether it's right for them, to actually come forward and seek themselves as a volunteer, either as a trustee if they have particular skill sets, or just someone who is willing to get amongst the, the muck and bullets of the organisation and do day-to-day activities. And so I do think Hillingdon People is a vehicle for us to help promote the voluntary sector and to support it into rebirthing itself as organisations, as we all know from our own experiences, sometimes have a tendency that people move out, die off and what have you, and it's sometimes difficult to keep a constant flow of new expertise coming into an organisation. So with those suggestions, which I think we as a Cabinet should also take away, I would suggest we support the recommendations and send our thanks to all volunteers who have helped splendidly across the borough in the last 15-18 months.
The crucial role that the third sector plays in supporting the needs of the residents. It says during the pandemic, but this is business beforehand and it will be business afterwards. They are key strategic partners. We have a symbiotic relationship. We are dependent upon each other. But as Councillor D. Mills has pointed out, that there is opportunity here for us to move into an even more stable relationship with our larger organisations around future funding and commissioning of services. We have a lot to be proud of on our third sector. We have a lot to be proud of for the way the Council and the third sector worked together over the last year and a bit. Very, very grateful. And colleagues, are these 4 recommendations agreed? They are agreed. Thank you very much. Turn to agenda item 6, please, the Flood Action Plan. Councillor Lavery.
Thank you, Leader. The report has two recommendations on page 32 of the Cabinet Pack. To approve the Flood Action Plan and agree the implementation of actions. This work is crucially important given the changing nature of our climate, the more frequent weather events, and of course the changing patterns of rainfall that we've all seen. The work is involved and complex. We work with the Environment Agency on large long-term projects, particularly around our rivers. We will be bringing forward local projects for certain of our own assets, and obviously encouraging better land management from some landowners to ensure that less water actually flows off in the first place. There's a very helpful table in page 59 of the report that shows the 15 or so current sites where the council is actively coordinating work to improve the flood position. So with that, I move the two recommendations.
Thank you very much, Councillor Every. Any other comments on this one? I'd just like to say how welcome this report is. Very apposite. On track for the wettest month, May, on record, and we're talking about flood prevention. I know from my own involvement, my own residence, that flood prevention mitigation is a complex issue, and there is a risk of it just be seen by residents to be a talking shop amongst agencies with no great delivery, as these things take a long period of time to develop. So bringing forward this flood action plan, which clearly states what we're going to do, and to actually carry out some remedial work, should gain residents' confidence that as a council we are committed to do our very best to prevent flooding and to mitigate its impact wherever we can. So are those recommendations agreed, colleagues? Thank you very much. Attend to agenda item 7, the licensing scheme for outdoor fitness. Councillor Lavery again.
Thank you, Leader. The report has 4 recommendations regarding the introducing of a licensing scheme for outdoor fitness instructors operating commercially in our parks and green spaces, to agree the fees, to note the outcome of the statutory consultation, and for a licensing scheme to be introduced. There has been a large increase in the number of people using our parks and open spaces for commercial fitness activity, particularly driven by the pandemic, and there is a need to ensure that we have access to our open spaces for all visitors, and that fitness instructors hold appropriate qualifications, comply with best practice, and have public liability insurance. This report follows a Cabinet decision in October of last year and a consultation. I therefore move the 4 recommendations.
Thank you very much. Any other comments, colleagues? Are those 4 recommendations agreed? Thank you. Agenda item 8, the Academy conversion, Hermitage Primary School. Councillor Bianco.
Thank you. Well, this is a straightforward situation. When academies are created, as is happening in this case, it is invariably involves the conversion of a school that is currently in our ownership to academy status, and we are required by the Secretary of State to grant the academy in question a long lease of the land over which the school sits. And this is such a situation in this case in respect of Hermitage Primary School. The lease is for 125 years. It does enable us to retain the freehold, which is important, and it does mean that if at some future point the academy ceases to exist, we can lay claim back to the land, or if indeed the academy decides to close this school and has mind to do something else with it, we can again lay claim back to the land. So it's a necessary step. The recommendation is at the bottom of page 89, and I move it.
Thank you. Any other comments? Is that recommendation agreed? Thank you. Agenda item 9, the appropriation of land at Hillingdon Court Park. Councillor Bianco.
Thank you, Leader. Well, this is a slightly unusual situation. Court Park is obviously one of our open spaces, but this relates to a small piece of land where the pavilion site, the old pavilion site sits, and due to some very old agreements dating back to 1928, there is a need for the council to obtain a release of the land from its previous use as a park and it to be released for us to be enabled to move forward and develop it. There are two recommendations at the top of page 96. The first authorises officers to give a public notice, and the second delegates the authority to yourself and myself, along with the corporate director responsible, to consider any objections should they occur. I so move.
Thank you. Any comments? Are those two recommendations agreed? Thank you. We're now moving into part two, so I'll say good evening to those following us on YouTube, and we'll now break the link. Thank you. Mark, if you'd advise us when that's done.